All right, welcome to Psych319, Chapter 6, Part 3. I'd like to start off with repressed memories and motivated forgetting. Um, repressed memories, the idea behind a repressed memory is that there's something so traumatic in a person's life that they choose or they can't remember that episode or event. And you'll find this a lot in TV and soap operas and whatnot. Um, and I think the idea is also very closely linked with Freudian psychology, the idea that there's a memory from childhood that is too traumatic to recall, um, and that they could be unearthed in psychotherapy. The problem is under strict testing conditions, this recovery process um, it tends to occur because a psychologist is leading the patient to confabulate. There's really no strong evidence for repressed memories whatsoever, and I know this is hard to believe because there are even people in psychology who still believe in them, and it's just a myth that is constantly propelled in the media, and so on and so forth. But really, think about it from this perspective. Um, every time you're actively trying to forget something, you're really rehearsing it. So I want you to try and actively forget your name. It's going to be very hard to do. And that's sort of the idea with repressed memories. If something is very difficult and traumatic, it actually makes strong, deep, and meaningful connections with all of the things in our brain. And therefore, it becomes even more and more difficult to forget. This is what post-traumatic stress disorder is all about. Believe me, the people with PTSD would love to be able to get rid of their traumatic memories of rape and violent crime and war, but they can't. So it turns out that it's quite the opposite. When you're exposed to something very traumatic, you don't repress it. It becomes it sort of engulfs every aspect of your life. Um, but there is something that's sort of related where you can have poor memory encoding caused by trauma. So the memory might not actually make it to long-term memory because of the stress that you're under while you're learning that bit of information. So for example, this is why people forget their attackers when they're raped or mugged, because the stress is so severe that they don't remember the details of the event. Um, and in car accidents, it happens for a different reason. Acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter in the brain that's secreted under periods of high stress. It helps us undergo our fight or flight reflex. So it prepares the body for action um, by getting rid of stuff that you don't need in combat or when you're running. And a lot of that is higher order thinking processes. You just need to run. It tends to interfere with memory formation by disrupting the action of the hippocampus, and the hippocampus's main goal is to convert those short-term memories into long-term memories. So if it's not able to do its job, then you will forget things. This might be, maybe some of you have had this idea of seeing the life flash before your eyes. It's a result of acetylcholine affecting memory circuits. So under periods of high stress, it creates this flood of neurotransmitter in the brain that starts to just trigger memories randomly, and things just start to coming to the surface in no particular order. And I've experienced this before in a car accident. It's actually very, very convincing. You really do sort of see your life flash before your eyes, but it's really just a bunch of unearthed memories happening all at once for no particular reason. So a way of determining whether people are actually lying or not in a memory test um, has been achieved. Let's take this following example. Let's say you wanted to prove somebody was lying in an insurance claim. So you suspect that they're malingering, that they're lying. The claimant says that they lost their memory during an auto accident. How could you actually test this? You suspect that they're faking injury. One way is to use statistics. You ask them about a bunch of facts surrounding the event. A true amnesiac, somebody who lost their memory, will pretty much perform at chance. They'll get 50% of the information correct and 50% of the information wrong. Malingerers tend to perform worse than chance. They lie too much to cover their tracks, in essence. And it's a statistical unlikelihood that they would perform so poorly. So by performing below the chance, they actually show that they do know about the information, that they're avoiding reporting the truth. So let's get into the physiology without getting too deep into it. I mentioned the hippocampus before, and there are really two very relevant structures, the hippocampus and the amygdala. Um, and these allow us to transfer these short-term memories into long-term memories. Remember I was talking about anterograde and retrograde amnesia and patient HM. Um, patient HM had damage to his hippocampus, bilateral damage. He underwent a surgery, and as a result, he had an inability to form new memories based on his lack of a hippocampus. So the hippocampus seems to be important for rehearsing in a loop with frontal cortex. So frontal cortex allows us to predict the future and see maybe how these memories might be useful to us, and the hippocampus sort of rehearses that information, and then eventually with enough rehearsal it goes into long-term memory. But it's important to know that the hippocampus doesn't actually store any data on its own. The hippocampus in itself is just a memory-making machine, but nothing is stored there. Now the amygdala is incredibly important because it's responsible for a lot of our emotional behavior, and it's very important in memory because what it does is when some information is circulating in this rehearsal loop between hippocampus and prefrontal cortex, if there is emotional activity going on in the amygdala, then we start to value that information more. We start to say, oh, the information we're rehearsing is emotionally significant to it, and therefore we should remember it. So the amygdala's job is basically to stamp memories as being significant or not to us. And if they are significant, then we tend to remember them better. Here's a brain scan from HM. His hippocampi have been removed by surgery. He had short and long-term memory, but he really couldn't form new memories. So he could carry a conversation, but 15 minutes later he would forget who you were. He doesn't remember from one day to the next, but it's still a very intelligent person. Now this is a woman who had damage to her amygdala. So she's making a bunch of facial expressions here. She has the ability to produce the facial expressions, but when she was shown these pictures, she couldn't recognize her own facial expressions as being either happy or sad or disgusted or scared or angry. So it just shows the importance of the amygdala and the recognition of emotion. And there's one patient, well, more than a few, but there's one patient I want to show you who's particularly interesting. This patient has temporal lobe epilepsy, so he has epilepsy, and the focus of his seizures are, around where his ears are, which is right next to the amygdala. So he has an overstimulated amygdala, and the result is everything in the environment gets labeled as being incredibly significant. So things that you and I just think are boring or take for granted, like a chair, a coffee table, something like that, he thinks that they're the most beautiful things he's ever seen because his amygdala is constantly active. The end result is that this particular patient reports having a religious experience, or that he has the ability to talk to God, or that God talks to him, because everything is so emotionally significant. He's put this kind of perceptual spin on that experience. And I would be happy to show you the video, but I'm not entirely sure it would play, so I'm going to refer you to the video online. It's a special called Secrets of the Mind, and the particular relevant section is featured in this link. And you can see firsthand not only the reason for his behavior, but kind of the way it affects him, and how his whole world is rocked by the fact that everything in the world is now imbibed with this significance based on the overactivity of the amygdala. Anyway, so I hope you enjoyed that section on long-term memory, and I will see you in Chapter 7.